Today it's the digestive system. Hello, Gunnar. So the digestive system is responsible for taking food in and supplying it to the rest of the body in terms of nutrients and water, and also for extracting the waste products and removing them out of that end. So it starts up there, ends there, and we're going to follow the journey of a mouthful of forage. So I'm going to give this to Gunnar, and he can start eating this whilst we discuss the journey. So it will start with his muzzle and his lips, and to do that he will forage the grass that he's going to be eating, and he will draw it into his mouth. So you can see that very mobile top bit of his muzzle is very, very mobile and is responsible for gathering it up and bringing it into his mouth. And he uses his incisor teeth to pull the grass out of the ground, and that's called prehension. So the incisors are very important for that. Once it's in the mouth, we then have the tongue pushing it to the back of the mouth, and that's where the cheek teeth are. And the cheek teeth are responsible for grinding it into the sort of consistency that it can then be swallowed and digested. So cheek teeth are very good, and that's why dentistry is so important. But that's another topic. So the cheek teeth, and you can see by the rotatory movement of his jaw, that's him grinding away at the hay that's in his mouth. And to help with that, you get a lot of salivary juices adding to the mixture at this stage, produced by the 3 salivary glands that you've got here. You've got the sublingual salivary gland, which is underneath the tongue. You've got the mandibular salivary gland and the parotid salivary gland, which are all in the throat area. So together, they all work together to do what's known as mastication. So the hay is now in a bolus of mushed up, moist, semi-chewed food, and it passes to the back of the throat, where you've got your soft palate and in the laryngeal area, and the swallowing happens there, and the bolus of food passes. In fact, if we just see whether we can watch him swallow, you probably won't get this, but if you do watch them eating, when they do swallow, if I come round here, not going to work, is it? Never work with animals, but normally one can see a swallowing action. And anyway, the bolus of food passes into the esophagus, and there it is propelled down into the stomach by the muscular walls of the esophagus using an action known as peristalsis, and it's propelled down here through the chest cavity, through the diaphragm, and into the stomach, which is sitting behind the diaphragm, partially covered by the ribs in this sort of area. And it enters the stomach through what's known as the cardiac sphincter. The cardiac sphincter is a one-way valve, and that's why horses can't vomit. Once the food is in the stomach, they can't bring it up again. Unlike us, we can bring food up in spectacular fashion sometimes. Horses can't. So once it's in the stomach, that's it. There's a lot more breakdown that goes on there using the stomach juices, enzymes, acids, etc. It can stay in the stomach for quite a while whilst it's all mushed up. And then it passes through the pyloric sphincter, and we're now going into the small intestines. It's the first part of the whole gut system. And the small intestines are divided into 3. The first part is a relatively short part called the duodenum. And here you get quite a lot of digestion going on. You get bile from the stomach adding into the mixture there, from the liver, adding into the mixture there. You get insulin from the pancreas adding into the mixture there. And you're starting to get the digestion and the breakdown of the soluble carbohydrates and the fats and the proteins. That continues as it moves into the into the jejunum, which is the largest part of the small intestine, covers a huge area, goes on for, is a very convoluted area. and the whole digestion of primarily your sugars, your soluble carbohydrates, your proteins and your fats goes on there, and the absorption of the nutrients across the gut wall. It then passes into the ileum, which is the last part of the small intestine, and it's there that you get the absorption of some of the minerals, such as calcium, going on. It then passes through into the large intestine, which again is in 3 parts. And in the large intestine, the first part of the large intestine is the cecum, which is the equivalent to our appendix, a bit like a holding chamber. So it sort of sits for a while there whilst other food is being processed, but a certain amount of digestion continues in there. It then moves onto the large colon, and then the small colon, and this is where the majority of the water is absorbed, and it's also where the roughage, which is what he's still enjoying and eating, it's also where the roughage tends to get broken down with the aid of millions and millions of little bacteria called microflora, and so that's where most of the fermentation of the longer stem fibre goes on there. And again, we'll talk more about that in the context of some of the problems we